Just got these drivers in from Avid Products. Robbie there machines these up. These are a beautiful work of art. They're going to go on this sled. Now there are a few things that I got to tell you about. It's important you all know this. Your newer IQR, this is the kind of axle shaft you get. It's got these extroverts. These are Polaris extroverts. Now it's got this slip shaft in here. So that's just when you fly off the jumps, you land really hard. That takes a little bit of the impact out of the drive system. You're not going to shear maybe the shaft off. This helps the racers out a lot, but we don't need that. That's a pretty darn heavy shaft right there, even compared to the older school IQR shaft from I think this is from an 05 or an 06. We're going to use this shaft. This one, we don't need it. Now there's some differences I need to tell you about with all these drivers. These old school drivers, these are all internal drive. Now they're okay if you run with a tight track. We want to run our track a little looser. That's why we're going with an external drive, or an external driver, or these extroverts you might want to call them. Now Polaris, on their newer IQRs, use these anti-ratchet or extrovert type of drivers, but there are a few differences between that and these Avid Products drivers. Now since these are machined on a lathe, they're actually more true. If you're into tuning your sled, fine-tuning it, a perfectly rounded driver is a lot better to have on your sled. These are molded, not necessarily rounded perfectly. Some guys will actually take their drivers, put them on a lathe, make sure that they're exactly round. Robbie, because he does them this way, they're exactly round. We know that for sure. Now differences between the Polaris stock anti-ratchet driver and Robbie's at Avid Products. This little anti-ratchet point right here, these actually don't come in contact with the track until the track starts to slip. The track starts to come off here, it'll come in contact with this flattened area right here, and that's when it actually grabs. On the Polaris anti-ratchet, you can actually see where the rounded portion of the track clip comes in contact with the rounded portion of this anti-ratchet point right here, and it wants to come up and over top of it. It wants to slip off. That's not a good thing to have. You want that nice and flat. Robbie came up with that. You want that nice and flat. That's the way it's going to work. Now another difference between his drivers and stock, this little portion right here is actually flat. It's not rounded like on the Polaris or stock driver. That means it pulls the track in a little tighter. You have better contact in here with your internal drives. Robbie machined these up for our application. It's got an 1 1/8 size hex shaft. It's going to be pressed on, and it's a 2.86 drive pitch. So all in all, the benefits you're going to get from this driver, it's perfectly rounded. It's got a better anti-ratcheting system on it because it's flat surfaced. This here, this portion is actually flat. The track is allowed to actually go in a little tighter. It's machined to our application, and because you're running these anti-ratchet drivers, you can run your track a little looser. Now Robbie tells us when you're going to set up your track tension, you just want to hang the back end off the ground for something, say, over 151 inches. You hang the back end up. You want your track to sag down just so when you're looking at the lowest part, the internal drive is just at the bottom of your slider. Now we're just going to press off these old drivers off this hex shaft. I'm going to show you how to put the new ones on. The first thing I got to do is press these old drivers off. There we go. So this one wasn't coming off too easy. I've pressed out these types before and never had an issue. But this one was, man, it was pretty tight. I think I was going to break the bar on this. So what I did was I just took the torch and I heated up the drivers right where they're attached in the middle of that, right in the middle here where they have these little metal sleeves. I mean, I wasn't planning on reusing these anyway. There we go. And that did it. You know, when you run into these shafts, they've got some rust on them, tend to get a little trickier to work with. And I think that's what happened to us. So, there we go. That heat did the trick. As long as you're not planning on reusing these drivers, which we weren't going to do anyway. I put an extrovert driver on just about every sled I have now. I don't bother with these internal drive types. Too old school. Came out very easily, actually, once we added that heat to it. Now we're going to put those new drivers on. I'm going to show you how. This is always tricky. It's always takes me a little while to get my head around this. But when I spoke with Robbie at Avid Products, he said, take your shaft, find the middle of the two drivers, which is basically right here in the center of this, where this slip yoke or slip shaft or whatever it is they call this little balancer in the middle here is. And I did that. I put this up against the wall, so I made sure it was flush, measured it, and then from either side of that, I measured 4 inches out. That basically gives me to the inside of this anti-ratchet right here. And then I just added that on, the length of that. That tells me exactly where I need to put them. On my shaft here, already measured. So when I press these on, I want that to be right about there. Now what happens sometimes, when you're pressing these on, that driver itself will sort of scrape that material off. So I'm just going to take a little scribe and just put a mark on there. That way it won't rub off. Then we can press this on. Now if you measure the distance between your track clips, you're going to get 7 7/8 from the inside to the inside. When you install these drivers, you're going to have 8 inches in between there, in between these anti-ratchet little knobs here. That's going to give you about 1/16 of an inch on either side for that track to play. Anybody who puts more than that on, you've maybe got a little bit too much wander in your track. You're not going to want that. Speaking of the pro, I'm going to do what he says. Now, let's get this pressed on. Now come check this out. When you go to put this on, make sure you line up the flat edge of the shaft with the flat edge on here. Now, one thing you have to make sure about is that your drivers are aligned. So Robbie, thinking of everything, he marks your little alignment marks. That's what these black markers are for. We just have to make sure that those two line up when I'm installing it. Now I'm just going to measure in between here. I already know where this is supposed to be. There we go. Our drivers are on. Put them inside the track here. Sweet. Now, I need to put my bearing on, but one thing I have to keep in mind is that I need this on the inside. Don't press your bearing on first and then try to get that on, because it's not going to happen. I don't know if I've done that. Okay, I have done that several times. As soon as that stops, your bearing's on all the way. So that's it. That's the bearing install with the Avid Products drivers, anti-ratchet drivers. So that's it. That's the bearing. So that's it. That's the install of the Avid Products anti-ratchet drivers. I got to thank Robbie, and I got to thank Robbie at Avid Products for actually telling us how to do this and sending us these. Yeah. There we go. The drivers are on exactly the way they're supposed to be. We're going to install the track a little later, get everything in there, show you how to do it. So I got to thank Robbie at avid-products.com for sending us these very nice extrovert drivers. He's got a lot of other cool products on there, billet wheels, the whole 9 yards. You better check him out. He's a guy that takes pride in his work, all American made. I got to thank you guys for watching. Make sure you come back for more, because we have some cool videos coming up. Going to install the track, cool suspension, belt drive, lots of cool things. Make sure you come back.
make it impossible.